Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Thank you all very much for coming at our request. I've asked for this opportunity to speak to you about the situation in Venezuela and the CARICOM response, which we addressed last night. As you all would be aware, the situation in Venezuela has become quite sensitive, and the CARICOM response to the developments largely triggered by the declaration of some countries that they will not recognize the government of Venezuela in office at this time, and the selection of an individual as an acting president. So what we do have in Venezuela, our nearest South American neighbor, are two presidents, one in office, sworn in by the Supreme Court and in charge of the military with widespread public support of some kind, and another identified and promoted by others with support. The situation is very delicate, and as a result of that, the chairman of the CARICOM, who is now the Prime Minister of St. Kitts, that being the destination where the next heads of government meeting is being earmarked to be held in February, he, along with other members of the CARICOM, including Trinidad and Tobago, called for and operationalized a heads of government meeting last night, an emergency meeting by teleconference. The meeting started just after 4 and it finished about 10 o'clock last night. And during that meeting, most of the heads of CARICOM were present on teleconference, and for the one or two who were not present, their foreign minister was present, and for two territories where neither Prime Minister nor Foreign Minister could have been present, there was an official, and this includes the territory of Montserrat. So all the CARICOM territories, as far as I'm aware, were in that conference. And the purpose of that long exercise last night was to allow each CARICOM territory to express itself to its colleagues, and by extension the world through CARICOM, in the context of the most recent development. If you recall, for many months, the situation in Venezuela has been of concern to all of us, especially Trinidad and Tobago, where we are only 7 miles from the Venezuelan eastern coastline. The mainly South American countries had taken a position of mobilizing and naming themselves the Lima Group for a meeting in Lima, with an expectation that they would force the issue in Venezuela to bring about regime change. Trinidad and Tobago, from day one, was not supportive of this approach of a forced regime change in Venezuela or in any territory where, in fact, anything short of genocide would have caused us to have taken that position, because it is not a position that is supported. In contrary, it is a position that is expressly forbidden by particular articles in the OS and at the UN. That position, as advanced by the Lima Group, doesn't matter how aggrieved they feel and how much humanity they want to express, forced entry to bring about regime change in a political environment is forbidden by the OS article. It is forbidden by the UN article. If there are difficulties, as there are in Venezuela or anywhere in the world, there are other mechanisms for treating with it. And Trinidad and Tobago has kept faith with those articles in those international bodies where we are a member. That being so, we do know that at the recent meeting where a motion was put to carry out that objective, all members were required to take one of three positions: vote for the motion to accelerate action against the Venezuelan government, vote against it, or to take a neutral position with the expectation that we could take this ship to safer waters. Our CARICOM colleagues, I think 4 of them, namely Jamaica, Haiti, Guyana, and the Bahamas, voted for the Lima motion. A number of territories voted against it. And I think 8 territories, including Trinidad and Tobago, just Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Antigua, Dominica, and others, did not take a side. Of course, here in Trinidad and Tobago, persons with no responsibility and responsible to no one but themselves, not even to the oath of office that they've taken, they have an issue with our position. But I could tell you, after that vote was taken, in the innocence of appearing to support the oppressed in Venezuela, soon after, it immediately ratcheted to something far more dangerous. And that is the selection and apparent attempt to put in office of an individual who claimed political and executive leadership of Venezuela. In any part of the world, in any country, this would be a dangerous development. Because the distance between that, as a motion carried, and an exhortation from a powerful country, and putting it into action, is one that is fraught with all kinds of dangers, which can only worsen an already bad situation. No one can pretend that the situation in Venezuela is a good one. Venezuela has serious internal problems of one kind or another. But it is not the business of Trinidad and Tobago, or I dare say, or of those who give themselves that authority, to walk into Venezuela by force to fix their internal problems. That approach is forbidden by the OAS Charter and is forbidden by the US doctrine. Because as you may justify it today in this case, as Emperor Haile Selassie had said, when his country was invaded by Italy and the League of Nations was failing, today is my day, your day will come. The League of Nations does not exist. History will show that it is deemed to have been a failure and it had created the environment for World War II. However, subsequent to World War II, the United Nations, of which we are a part, exists, and we are an integral part of the United Nations. At the level of CARICOM, in the development of this president being identified and recommended for office by our neighbor, the United States, and others of some South America, we beg to decline. But last night's meeting brought us together at CARICOM to make sure that on this occasion we work hard, not that our members can have disparate positions as it was with the Lima meeting, but now that the situation has evolved to a presidential regime changing arrangement, more sober heads would have been at the table at CARICOM, and we did at the end of the evening end up with a CARICOM position which is as close to unison as we have been in I don't know how long. The CARICOM communique, which I'm sure you would have had, did you get it? Do you have it? Yeah. CARICOM's position with respect to the current state of affairs in Venezuela and our region is in that memo. And Trinidad and Tobago's position and Trinidad and Tobago's role is recorded there. We are part of the leadership of CARICOM, and the letter and the spirit of that text embodies us and our people. And that is why today, the statement by the opposition can be seen and ought to be seen for what it is: reckless and undermining of the government's effort in treating with a particularly difficult situation. You would know that it is not only Trinidad and Tobago that took that position in CARICOM. All the conversations you're hearing trying to place some kind of mantle of irresponsibility or ostrich behavior by the government, old talk is cheap. But walking that minefield calls for leadership, and this government has provided that leadership so that today we can speak to Caracas, we can speak to Washington, we can speak to London, we can speak to Australia, and we hold our position. Highly respected by all of those, because we have not taken sides. One or two CARICOM countries have taken sides in accepting the nomination of the new president. Well, we in Trinidad and Tobago do not want to be in their shoes now. We don't want to be in that position. And as the opposition has taken a side, that is for them to do. It is not the first time that that group of persons have taken decisions that are detrimental to the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. You may recall, when I came into office as your new prime minister, one of the first things I had to do was to go to Jamaica and calm the ruffled feathers to bring about a removal of a boycott against Trinidad and Tobago's manufactured products. And that is not as a result of good external relations within CARICOM between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. That was done by this government, led by me. You may recall, in an election in France, there's a French election. The French Nationalist Party, which is the most racist party in Europe, so racist that none of the representatives at the UN in New York will receive a visit from Marine Le Pen, who was the leader of that party, when she made a visit to New York in promotion of her campaign. The only ambassador representing the only country to have met with Marine Le Pen for a meal and giving her the status of meeting with a representative was Rodney Charles of Trinidad and Tobago. If ever this country was humiliated, that is when we were. Granted, the ambassador was hungry, but we could have provided him with a meal. He didn't have to sell our country out for a meal with Marine Le Pen. Today, he is declaring, as the member of parliament under a leader, that they are taking sides in Venezuela. Of the two presidents, which one they're choosing? The one that can only get into office by force. The president that can only get into office in Venezuela by force is where our opposition is. But I leave that for you, the people. What we say is that the Venezuelan situation is a situation that all of us are concerned about. But the threat at rectification as held out to us now is a situation where if it is allowed to develop further, the second state would be worse than the first. I want to read for you the position of Mexico. Mexico at that meeting of the Lima group, like Trinidad and Tobago, did not take a position for or against. Nor did Uruguay, nor did Barbados. None of those countries, Mexico, Uruguay, Barbados, or the other CARICOM countries that didn't take a position and preserved our neutrality in this matter so as to be useful going forward and not to escalate the situation. I am not aware that any of them have any gas deal arrangement with Venezuela, as Trinidad and Tobago has. Yet, our opposition is obsessed with the fact that this government was able to achieve what no other government has been able to achieve, which is an agreement with the government of Venezuela and the government of Trinidad and Tobago to allow a marketing of Venezuela gas in Trinidad and Tobago, a pure business deal, which benefits the people of Venezuela because they will get to sell their gas, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago will get to use our equipment, and both countries will earn and live in that business arrangement. The opposition has an obsession with that deal. They want to see it fail. They are in the forefront of giving the impression that our position in this very delicate matter, this very explosive matter, which has the potential to destroy the region, because a conflagration in Venezuela, led by others from the north and the east and the west, could destroy not just Trinidad and Tobago's economy, but the entire Caribbean tourism economy. Because if there's conflict in this area, as there is elsewhere in the world led by these same kinds of approaches, all of us in the region will suffer. But our opposition want to use the opportunity of this development to undermine the successful arrangement that exists between the government of Venezuela and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. An arrangement that is meant to supersede not just office holders Maduro and Rowley, but to maintain the relationship between the people of Venezuela and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to say to all and sundry, especially the Johnny-come-latelys, Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with Venezuela is is centuries old. And the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, as the name now says, if you know the history of Trinidad and Tobago and the history of Venezuela, you will know that Simon Bolivar is not new to Trinidad and Tobago. And we are not Johnny-come-latelys. What we are is a responsible small Caribbean territory that have so conducted our affairs that we are and will be able to always handle our stories, being respected and be respectful of all others. Let me read for you the Mexican position and see if you see any similarity between the Mexican position and the Trinidad and Tobago's position on this matter. And this is a communique sent to us by our ambassador from Washington, Ambassador Philip Spencer. This is the Mexican's position, and it goes as follows, I quote, "In accordance with our constitutional principles of non-intervention, self-determination of peoples, peaceful settlement of international disputes, legal equality of states, respect, protection, and promotion of human rights, and struggle for international peace and security." And that is Article 89, Fraction 8 of the Mexican Constitution. "Mexico will not participate in the ignorance of the government of a country with which it maintains diplomatic relations. We will fully agree with the call of the United Nations Organization that all the actors involved in the conflict in Venezuela reduce tensions, make the greatest efforts to avoid escalation, and reject any type of political violence. We also share with the Eastern Republic of Uruguay the call for dialogue between the parties, and like Spain and Portugal, we wish for a political solution to the situation in Venezuela." That is Mexico's position. And I see no gas pipeline mentioned there. What I see is a great similarity between the CARICOM position and the position of Mexico, and Mexico mentions the position of Portugal and Spain and Uruguay. So that should tell you where your country's position is as against voting in a meeting to take sides, and now it blows up into a full-blown international potential for serious difficulty, international difficulty. It's the trending world news right now, the situation in Venezuela. It is because we have handled ourselves properly why we are now in a position to go to the UN with a CARICOM accord representing a CARICOM position of which Trinidad and Tobago's position is an integral part, subsumed in there. So we took a decision last night to seek an audience with the Secretary General of the United Nations as a CARICOM position. CARICOM's leadership at this time, which includes full support from Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister Harris leaves tomorrow for New York, where we are at the moment attempting to confirm a meeting with Secretary General on Monday. I am making arrangements to travel to join him in New York. I travel tomorrow if all the confirmations come in. Not tomorrow, I travel on Sunday. He travels tomorrow, I'll travel on Sunday. And we get to New York, and we will have the requisite meetings with those who we are to speak to in this situation. I expect that those meetings will take place on Monday, and I should be able to leave New York on Tuesday. I then will go to Washington and will meet the relevant persons who we are to speak to on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM, and return after that sojourn. Trinidad and Tobago's position is that we will, like Mexico, treat with this issue not by force or by entreaties of others with agendas known only to themselves, but our agenda is for peace and security in our region. And if Venezuela is a target, Trinidad and Tobago is, if not in, very close to the bullseye. We have never taken the position of bringing about regime change of governments that we don't like. Unless, of course, such people in such government engage in acts of genocide, like Rwanda and like happened in the Balkans. Political issues are for political dialogue and for a reduction in tensions until the dialogue bear fruit. We have kept faith with our position, which is not one that changes by the hour, but it is a fundamental principle. This is the same principle of non-interference and non-intervention that Prime Minister Patrick Manning had made headlines on the Newsday, and I think you have copies around somewhere. There's a famous Newsday headline where it was said by Prime Minister Patrick Manning that the person in charge of the country is the person who answers the phone. That was when President Chavez was temporarily out of office in an almost similar situation at an earlier time. We, especially you in the media, I entreat you to not treat this as an isolated situation. Intervention in Caribbean territories is not new. And for those who have limited access to history and short-sighted agendas like the statement you heard in our parliament today, where our opposition is taking sides in this issue in support of someone they hardly know, and on what authority he's going to come into office. And this has nothing to do with our condition of humanitarian response to the Venezuelan problem. That's a separate issue, which we're handling separately. And as I say that, I must tell you, in our effort to treat with the issue, a lot of misinformation is in Trinidad and Tobago. Some people are giving you the impression that Venezuela is being emptied into Trinidad. That is not so at all. The figures are, from authoritative sources, there are about 2.3 million Venezuelans who have left their country in recent times in response to the situation there, the political situation there. About 2.3 million Venezuelans. Of that, the UN figures, because they seem to keep figures which are a little different to ours because we think it's a little lower than that. But the UN figures are that 40,000 of those persons have come to Trinidad and Tobago. Whether they all have stayed, we don't know. But let's accept it for the moment. 40,000 out of 2.3 million people. It means that there are bigger problems elsewhere in terms of Venezuelans moving into other people's countries. The bottom line is, last night you heard a parliamentarian from the opposition saying that we have 60,000 Venezuelans here because 40,000 wouldn't do the damage. 40,000 wouldn't do the damage, so it's 60,000. And of course, you would hear that we have turned a blind eye to their plight. Nothing is further from the truth. As a matter of fact, we are currently actively bringing to the Parliament the legislation that is required to handle this situation which has been foisted upon us. And also, in terms of what ideas we can use to treat with the humanitarian side of it. Only recently, I had a meeting with the Archbishop, and we have agreed that the government will, and the government is pursuing this decision, to provide some kind of identification card for the persons who are here amongst us as persons who have come to us from the situation in Venezuela, so that such persons with that identification and with the legislation that's going to come would be protected from exploitation within our borders. That was the outcome of the meeting that we discussed with the Archbishop, whose subordinates at Living Water are in the forefront of providing humanitarian support for those persons who have come here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you the assurance that diplomacy is not about who shouts the loudest. Diplomacy is not about who is the strongest. Diplomacy is who keeps the wisest head. And your country, Trinidad and Tobago, we are in a position to ensure that we protect all the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And our sovereignty is not for sale, and it is not to be conscripted for political purposes, for momentary gain. And that is why, on this matter, we make it clear to all and sundry, it is not for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to bring about regime change in Venezuela to determine who runs Venezuela. It is for us to stand by our principles, to demand of all states around that we work peacefully and subscribe to the policy of non-intervention, non-interference, and ensure that we are good neighbors. Thank you very much.
Dr. Rowley, now I understand what you're saying, and yeah, keep it quick, and we appreciate it, but you're saying you don't agree with the move, you don't agree with the ouster. Is it that it's now time to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and vote no, or in one way or another, vote definitively when these issues come up in the OAS? Or
it doesn't go so. It does not go like that. It's usually never an either-or situation. You vote based on the circumstance at the time. And if you're going down the road on a bicycle, you have to be sure that if you come to a corner, that you can negotiate it with or without brakes. So we are not taking a position about a time to vote no and a time to vote yes. As a matter of fact, these things change by the minute. These things change by the hour, as in this case it has. Because I'm sure when you first heard this news about the vote with respect to who is in support and who is not, you did not expect at that time that it would be ushering in a new president in this way. And secondly, you did not expect that it would result in a confrontation between the United States and Venezuela about closing embassies and removing staff. And of course, the next step from that is the rescue of the staff that is not moved. And then we could get to a place of no return. So in international diplomacy, you keep your powder dry all the time, and you keep your options open all the time. In that way, you can always protect your country's interests. And we will not be encouraged to follow irresponsible persons in Trinidad and Tobago, like the opposition, who tells us that we must make our foreign policy something that comes out and runs counter to the UN Charter and the OAS principles. In the coming days and months and weeks and months, you will learn more about this as it unfolds.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon. When you go to New York and Washington, what will you exactly be suggesting? Because we did hear yesterday from Minister Young that Trinidad was taking a sort of peacemaker route. Would you still be offering our country as the location?
We are open if that opportunity arises to bring about any sort of dialogue. Way back when we said that, and we continue to maintain that way, because Trinidad and Tobago will not shy away from those responsibilities. And of course, we see ourselves as an honest broker in this matter. And we want CARICOM to also be an honest broker. And as I say that, I must point out to you, as soon as this problem started in Venezuelan deterioration, the OAS, which is the regional body of countries, was the forum where this matter could have and should have been dealt with politically. The Organization of American States. Something happened there which Trinidad and Tobago objected to very early. It was the public servant who headed the OAS, the Secretary General, at the urgings of who I don't know, took the position that as Secretary General, he would criticize and attack the Venezuelan presidency That was a no-no. Whether you like Venezuela or you like Maduro, that was not the point. The point was the OAS was taking sides in an issue where it should have been the vehicle for bringing about peace and good order. Trinidad and Tobago did not hesitate in condemning that action of the Secretary General. As a matter of fact, in order to preserve the OAS as an honest broker in this matter, and to give us all a chance at peace through dialogue, we called for the resignation of Almagro. There were those here in Trinidad and Tobago who knew more, not knowing anything of it at all, not supporting our government's position. But look at what happened. As soon as this development took place with the second president in Venezuela, without consulting members of the OAS, the Secretary General went out and purported to be speaking for countries in the OAS and acknowledged and accepted the new president as the president of Venezuela. This has caused serious disquiet and very strong feelings within CARICOM, objecting to the behavior, once again, of the Secretary General of the OAS. Because what he has now confirmed by doing that is that the OAS cannot play a peacemaker role in this matter. So he has deprived us of the use of the OAS in this very matter. So we have now to rely on the United Nations. And that is why CARICOM is heading to the United Nations, so that no further escalation can be countenanced and that we can move backwards from the brink where we are at the moment.
Mr. Prime Minister, just a quick question. Has our government been quoted to pick sides in this matter?
Yes, we have, and we have declined it.
Would you care to say?
No, I wouldn't.
Where did CARICOM stand on the Venezuela-Guyana issue? Where are we in that?
Very clear. We support Guyana's territorial claim, and we stand with Guyana in defense of its claim in the Essequibo. As a matter of fact, that goes back way back to the days of Dr. Williams, where we provided ideas and bases for that matter to be tempered for a while. And we stand with Guyana on this matter. It's a CARICOM issue. And every CARICOM has a government meeting. And there's one coming up in St. Kitts in a few weeks' time. There's an item on the agenda where CARICOM stands with Belize against the Guatemalan claim and with Guyana against the Venezuelan claim. So these are issues, and we don't hide, these are open issues, but we take position on principle on these issues. Right? We don't sacrifice our principles for short-term gain. So Belize know where we stand, Guatemala know where we stand, on principle with that claim. Guyana know they can counter us, and Venezuela know that on this issue of the Essequibo claim, that Trinidad and Tobago supports the Guyanese position.
Prime Minister, just to go back to the humanitarian side of things, you mentioned a card that you had discussed with the Archbishop. Can you tell us exactly how that would protect the Venezuelans? I'm assuming you mean people legally here from exploitation.
Simply by identifying who is here and where they are. Because right now, we don't have that data. And if they have that kind of status, we can move towards better handling of the humanitarian conditions.
Okay. Can we get a timeline on when that will be implemented?
I couldn't answer that question at this time. We are working towards it, and as soon as it's ready for operationalization, somebody could answer that. I think national security will have to deal with that. But it's a policy position that we are pursuing.
Mr. Prime Minister, I have before me, I'm not sure if you got sight of it, there's a press release from the Public Affairs section of the United States Embassy. It says, I find the official statements from the government of Trinidad and Tobago recognizing the undemocratic and illegitimate government of Nicolas Maduro to be deeply concerning.
From the United States?
It says so from the embassy.
Well, let me just explain something to you. The government of the United States is free to take a position in the interest of the United States, and we will take no issue with the United States. However, I know of no statement made by Trinidad and Tobago which is in defense of a position that is new. The government in charge of Venezuela is the government led by Mr. Maduro. If there are those who are prepared to take action to bring about regime change in Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago is not to be counted among that, if that change is to be brought about in the way it is being structured at this point in time. So I have not seen that statement, and I tell you something, I am not reacting to that statement, because in this world, that could be a fake statement, because some of you would have seen a statement from Bloomberg saying that Trinidad and Tobago and 3 other countries are the only countries supporting Maduro. Turns out that Bloomberg did no such thing. It was fake news, where somebody in the UNC added Trinidad and Tobago to 3 other countries who they believe are pariah countries to further the attack on this government. So I will respond if I have to, but we are not, our position, our foreign position is not being dictated by news releases made from other countries about our position. I want to reinforce. A position of Trinidad and Tobago is embodied in the CARICOM position. We have no separate position. We got consensus at CARICOM, and we are there with that. And any position of Trinidad and Tobago on any matter, this or any other, regarding any country, will be a position taken by Trinidad and Tobago's government on behalf of the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I brought up the Bloomberg fake news, and I told you who put it out. I don't want to go any further on that. It must be something useful we can talk about after.
My question is really that some would, I know you stated our position of neutrality, but some would say Trinidad and Tobago's presence at Mr. Maduro's inauguration was a sign of support, or a sign of us picking sides. How would you respond to that?
Well, had we not been present in a normal diplomatic arrangement, you'd say it was a sign of us taking sides. We didn't go. The government of Venezuela is the government of Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago has an embassy in Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago has a Venezuelan embassy in Trinidad. We have diplomatic relations with the government of the day. And if that event is taking place in Venezuela and we don't have an ambassador in post, the next thing is to send the minister. As a matter of fact, the invitation to the event was sent to the Prime Minister. So if we really wanted to make a big thing about it, I would have gone. And if there was an ambassador in post, he would have gone, or she. It just so happens that we have taken our ambassador of Venezuela out at this time for another assignment, and we are in the process of putting one in to replace to fill that vacancy. So all of these interpretations, it's Trinidad and Tobago's business, and we're minding our business. I don't know that it is the first time that countries have had this situation where you go to an inauguration, but you may have issues. Understood? So don't read too much into that. And if we didn't send somebody, you would have been reading that we have taken sides. We say we have not been picking sides. We have been following the principles. Eh? When did we stop following that principle? I'm sure there are more pictures of Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Maduro than with me and Maduro. I'm sure.
Dr. We are looking at a situation that can possibly turn violent. Is that something, I mean, would that be the time when we buckle down, create a vote yes or no?
No.
How do we balance what is now? Right now it's all worried about 1 or 2 days. Apologies. But how do we now deal with a situation that potentially can turn into civil war, as was raised in the panel yesterday?
But it's an ongoing situation, and every day brings new challenges. Last night, CARICOM dealt with a lot of issues, and I dare say successfully. Monday, we expect to meet with the UN and continue dealing with the issues going forward. There's no milestone, milepost on the road where you say, okay, we've passed this milepost, so now we can be reckless. The dangers exist in every mile. So the most important thing is that Trinidad and Tobago has a position which is useful to the situation, both to our country and to whoever might be involved.
But your words here, do they not impact what happens going on as well? I'm asking in relation to voting again. So you're saying one thing, but you still.
It is not. This is not about. This is not about. This is not about voting. This is about standing in defense of a changing situation by the minute. That was only one vote. Suppose there's a vote at the UN sometime soon. We don't know. We can talk to the people who pose the biggest threats, and hopefully our CARICOM position would allow CARICOM to have the kind of leadership to be listened to by persons who might be tempted to be reckless. We don't have to read and spell for you. If the situation is as it is, that you have two countries, one our closest neighbor, the other our biggest trading partner, having these kinds of differences, where you're talking about regime change by force, where do you think we are in that? Which side should we take? Now you understand. Thank you very much.